This program is a Warren Steibel production in association with South Carolina ETV. Funding for Firing Line is made possible by a major grant from the John M. Olin Foundation, Incorporated. Additional support is provided by the Annenberg Foundation and the Friends of Firing Line.
This is the second hour devoted to examining the question of United Nations policy in the matter of Taiwan. A concise sentence tells us what is the position of the government of the Republic of China, ROC, as they call themselves. Quote, under one China, there are two political entities, neither one of which has jurisdiction over the other, whereas both are international juridical bodies in the world community. Our guests are Dr. Jason Hu is the Director General of the Government Information Office. If it is your impression that he speaks extraordinarily good English, that perhaps is traceable to the fact that he has a doctorate from Oxford University and has taught in American colleges. And our other guest is Dr. Henry Kissinger. He was present at the creation of the problem. When Taiwan lost its seat in Peking in 1971, when Dr. Kissinger was National Security Advisor to President Nixon, I'd be interested in hearing from Dr. Hu whether, in his judgment, public opinion could bring about a turn in Peking's policy on your entry into the UN.
Public opinions in the West, or there is probably not such thing, no such thing as public opinion in mainland China. But for the past 20 months or so, we have calculated that in the media of all countries, other than non-Chinese media, in all over the world, there are about 2,200 pieces of commentaries and articles supporting our return to the United Nations. Every single important newspapers.
Well, have they had any impact?
I don't know. I think there should be an impact, but we are realistic and pragmatic enough to recognize that there is a gap between media and academic support and concrete government support, i.e. votes at the UN. How do we bridge that gap? It's a very important task for us to try to perhaps do.
Let me ask Dr. Kissinger an academic question. Suppose that tomorrow the people of Taiwan announced that they were a separate state and that they sought admissions into the United Nations. Peking says, no, you're not a separate state. You belong to us. You're one of our provinces. There's then, let's say, in this hypothesis, a plebiscite, and they vote 98% for independence. What in the United Nations would govern in respect of the question, ought it to be recognized as a separate state?
I don't know that there is a legal precedent. I would think this would be determined very importantly on the basis of the political importance various nations attach to their relations to the chief contestants. But the principle that if a part of a country secedes and declares itself independent, that the United Nations does not automatically recognize that country. In fact, I don't know any instance where the United Nations has done that.
Well, I didn't say automatic. I said after a plebiscite.
Well, even after a plebiscite, I don't know any instance off the top of my head in the history of the United Nations that a country achieved independence against the opposition of the home country on the basis of secession and even a plebiscite.
So you have a situation where the PROC has never governed Taiwan.
No.
Does that give it at least presumptively the right to determine its own destiny, given that it's been doing so for the last 50 years?
There's several things in this. I think we are also realistic enough to recognize that our entry or re-entry into the UN is not really a legal matter. So it probably wouldn't help that much trying to settle it through the legal argument or legal way. It is that, pretty much a political matter, with one of the major, members of permanent members of the Security Council, PRC, objecting to it. But, if I may, also, if there are many countries who would justify their support on our position based on their relationship with us for return to the UN at this moment, they would do it now. They don't need to wait for a plebiscite. Because there is no higher power, sovereignty above us. We are a sovereignty ourselves. And on the other hand, lastly, sir, I'm sorry, but one has to recognize and sadly admitting the fact that if we do perhaps declare independence, change the name, showing actions moving permanently away from China or PRC, then perhaps it wouldn't take a day or two before we apply to the UN. Something drastic will happen. Peking had made it time and again clearly that they would reserve the use of military power should Taiwan declare independence, or trying to break away permanently, a permanent separation. So we're not going to get anything out of that. It is a very difficult situation.
No, I wasn't suggesting that you would get the acquiescence of Peking, but Peking would have a very difficult time if a plebiscite of the people, the 21 billion people, say, we want independent status, and including membership in the United Nations, irrespective of historical ties and how recently they were reaffirmed. Isn't that correct?
I believe that independence is absolutely the worst way for entry into the United Nations. Beijing, rightly or wrongly, and in its view rightly, would fight if a state of the American Union seceded even with a plebiscite. We would not recognize, Washington would not recognize this, and did not in fact recognize it during the Civil War.
Well, we've invited Puerto Rico to have as many plebiscites as they want, haven't they?
No, we have, no, but they...
It's a very different situation.
I mean, if Beijing agreed, of course it could happen. But, and Puerto Rico was never an integral part, it was never a state of the Union. I believe any observer of the situation would recognize that the declaration of independence by Taiwan would create huge problems. First of all, for the United States, which in four important documents has asserted one China, that is recognized as one China. Secondly, Beijing would certainly resist by force, so that any country accepting the independence of Taiwan. And thirdly, your formula does not make that claim. And I believe your formula, in fact, is a method by which Taiwan will enter international institutions and in time even the United Nations. The only difference really between you and me is that I believe it should be done through discussions with Beijing.
Well, even on that point, there's no difference. We're trying. So we just don't give up any possible options.
So, and not by confrontation with Beijing. It has been proved that Taiwan can enter international institutions. So, but independence, I would feel would lead to a
people in Taiwan also. People in Taiwan also realize that if they do, perhaps take that option up, declaring independence, there'll be a devastation, destruction, ultimate.
So me at the hands of mainland China.
Yes, obviously.
Well, but
we're giving them an invitation, in a sense.
Look, there isn't anything that hurts me or any member of this audience over the existing situation, i.e., if you're pleased with it, Peking is pleased with it, Dr. Kissinger is pleased with it, why get in the way?
What if
but the fact is that you're not entirely pleased with it. And as a result, we are perpetuating an abstraction, which is that this is one China. We all know it isn't one China. It's one China only as a result of a historical presumption. To say that we agreed in Peking in the manifesto of Dr. Kissinger, President Nixon, that we recommend unification by peaceful means is simply to wish the problem away chronologically. Nothing indicates 22 years later that there is going to be unification by peaceful means.
No.
You stand by your ground, Peking stands by its ground.
Well,
so what's the commotion about?
We're not that pessimistic. I mean, given the change in mainland China today, if we have another 22 years, I mean, there were 22 years when we were in the UN, now that there are 22 years, before we woke up, that we need to be returned.
Maybe the Great Wall will come down.
Well, I think given the fact that they are moving, you know, rapidly toward market economy, free market economy, and given the fact they're more open, and hopefully there'll be stability after the succession crisis or whatever, and they'll move, you know.
Okay, let's take that hypothesis. Then let's say that 5 years from now, the equivalent of the Berlin Wall happens in China, and they have an election, and that they're now a democratic country of 1.2 billion people, and they then urge you to feel free to send a representative to the General Assembly. I don't think that's going to appeal to the people of Taiwan so much, is it?
But by then, I think a democratic system would not force us with the guns, would they? So it will still become better. I mean, I think things are moving perhaps more optimistically, we hope. This system would never, it's not going to be there forever.
I think the Chinese are distinguished by their enormous practical sense. And when one travels around China, one sees so many accommodations that one never could see in the Soviet Union, for example. As Mr. Yu pointed out, there's a lot of Taiwanese investment in China.
Yes, in China.
Not by accident, much of it in Fujian province, which is right across from the Taiwan state. And I can foresee many practical arrangements that will emerge. And then if one takes the Jiang Zemin speech, which on the face of it, Mr. Hu thinks was not unacceptable on the face of it, if some details could be worked out, I can imagine that there will never be a dramatic moment where you say, now it's all settled. But where 2 or 3 years from now, one could say, they've come so close that many of the differences are less relevant.
We are even more patient. It may take longer than that, but we hope it would turn for the better. For instance, I can stress that we do not want to be confrontational with anybody. And we think that system will change for the better, to the direction that we all want it to change. Well, but better for the Chinese.
It doesn't have the stuff of causes militant, does it? That is, say, people are going to say, well, then there was the civil rights in the South, then there was getting out of Vietnam, now there's getting Taiwan into the United Nations. It's not a mobilizing pressure. You've got to know, A, why you want it, B, why they don't want it, and C, what can one do, assuming one is friendly to Taiwan, as I am, as he is, to advance that goal, other than say 21 million people shouldn't be ignored, to which they say, well, they are ignored to the extent that they consider themselves merely a province of China.
But we don't. We are part of China, but not a province of the People's Republic of China. One has to appreciate the difference and distinction between the proper China and the People's Republic of China, which is a communist system.
But in the Asian Development Bank, that's exactly your status. I mean, you're not a province of China.
No, no.
You're there in your own right.
We would never be, we would never accept that kind of arrangement. We would not be a responsible government. We would not be a responsible government to allow independence to take place in Taiwan.
Do you give up on any prospect of generating popular international movement to advance your position?
We don't. We, of course, like to see popular international support.
I know you like
movement.
to see it. I like to see it, but what is a... Why does it seems to have no sex? People can say, well, that would be very nice to have a seat in the United Nations, but so they don't have it now. They haven't had it for 20 years. They're prospering. They're wonderfully well off. The future may bring a collapse of communism in the mainland. Then they can negotiate a relationship. Isn't that the attitude of most people? And what can you do to ginger up that attitude?
Well, for today, talking to Bill Buckley and Henry Kissinger is one good start. I think people will look at this program and trying to understand us. I think things like this in the media. But what we really need to tell the world is that we are the 14th largest trading economy in the world, the 20th largest, GNP in the world. We have substantial economic relationships with all these countries. It is not to the benefit of the international community to keep us out of all these important international government organizations. We're not even possibly a member of the International Red Cross, for instance, Interpol, for instance. You name it, we're not in. Would this serve the world or would it not serve the world?
Can you isolate which of your positions were ignored in virtue of your not being present at the series of meetings?
You're saying?
Well, for instance, you're not a member of the Red Cross. That means concretely what?
That means concretely, even when we try to help other people, you cannot be given a chance. People say, but that's not important. That's not important.
No, it's very important.
Yes, but it's important to the people in Taiwan. We are a democratic system. One has to realize this, a prospect that I have not explained. We are a very democratic society in Taiwan now. Our people travel around the world. They feel very much being treated as a second-class tourist, or in a sense. They need more time to get a visa. They could never, in most cases, they need a separate paper. Visa cannot be stamped on a passport because we do not have diplomatic relations. We do not have diplomatic relations with many countries, no proper relation with many countries because we're not a member of the UN. You know.
Well, we've only just now authorized the president to stop at a men's room in America.
That's right. And people now return and said, what is the government doing? They should do better, trying to give us a better international status, and we have to do something about this.
Have you got any problem with that, Dr. Kissinger? Is there any way in which we can act in a more civilized way towards the public officials of Taiwan without...
I don't know all the details with which they're treated. I think it was a mistake last year not to permit the president
to go to Cornell,
to leave the airplane in Hawaii last year. The issue of, and I also think that issue could have been handled in a more skillful way. I agree that he should not be received as the president of a country here, because that would really then raise the issue that we are recognizing to China. But within, I think the human aspect, one has to avoid that Taiwan appears as if it is trying to generate a confrontation between Beijing and the United States for the reasons that I gave before. Within these limits, I think many human adjustments can and should be made. I don't know all the details.
You see, this is exactly what I was just saying when you said, what could the United States government do? In fact, if we could all try to convince leaders in Peking to give us a little bit more room in the international community, it wouldn't hurt anybody. It actually would perhaps generate better feeling from us towards them. This is what we can.
I'd rather do whatever needs to be done at once than every 3 months say, well, we're doing this because it doesn't mean anything. And then the question is, if it doesn't mean anything, why do you do it? So it creates suspicion in Beijing and no satisfaction anywhere else.
But as I said, we like, we don't mind you have a good relationship with Peking. We just want to be two set of parallel relationships. We don't want to be involved we don't want to be a chips or victimized in your relationship, in the relationship between Washington and Peking. And also, Bill asked me a while ago, I've been thinking about that, what could we tell the world in one short sentence that we need to be re-involved in the UN and all that, as a matter of urgency. I couldn't give you I could give you a lot of good reasons, but I couldn't give you one good sharp reason. But one has to stop and think, why keep us out? Why, everybody's in. Why should we be kept out?
Well, now, wait a minute. Didn't we agree a moment ago that there was no analogy, that is, there is no other country that is de facto independent in the law dependent. There's no other place in the geography of the world, is there, that duplicates your situation?
No, this is a very unique situation.
So therefore, you're not being picked on, you're being treated on as unique.
We are. We are unique. But that doesn't mean that we should just leave it unsolved. We can solve it. It's not that difficult. Actually, people forgot.
Well, you would give a lobotomy to Peking, you might be sorry, but short of that.
Well, we're still trying. We are talking to them, as I said. We're talking to everybody.
Well, now, the instrument that they use, is it the raw power that they have in the United Nations, or do they have economic sanctions? I should think they wouldn't be nearly as powerful as your own. I mean, if you were to be picked on, you'd rather be picked on by mainland China than by Taiwan, wouldn't you? If you were, say, Sweden.
That's right. Economic reprisals or sanctions. But still, I think political weight and economic sanctions that it could take, retaliation, reprisal, whatever, still matters a lot to a lot of people.
Well, let me ask Dr. Kissinger whether, since everybody anticipates a lot of changes in mainland China when this administration passes on to a better world, is one of those changes conceivably one that will be more propitiatory on the Taiwan question?
Incidentally, I don't anticipate such huge changes in China after Deng dies, because I believe he's substantially not conducting governmental affairs today. And so I would expect gradual changes. But a country cannot have the economic transformations that China has had in the last decade without adapting its political system to the modernization that's already been taking place in economics. I believe that at least in their language, the existing Chinese government has been fairly propitiatory. It has not had enough flexibility perhaps to implement what they have said. And therefore I believe that over a period of years, much of what we are talking about here can occur. Funnily enough, the problem is not so much what Mr. Hu is saying. The problem is that some of the friends of Taiwan in this country believe that only by a direct confrontation with Beijing can they aid the cause of their friends in Taiwan. And I believe that this is probably wrong.
Yeah. Now, are these forces that are primarily driven by nostalgic memories, or are you talking about live political forces?
Well, I think there are some live political forces, and then there are many people who, like me, are extremely anti-communist, but who, unlike me, are not willing to accept the necessities that the complexity of Asia imposes on us, and who therefore prefer a more confrontational approach. Ideologically, I am opposed to a communist system. I believe, however, that the economic changes that have taken place in China will make it impossible to operate a classic communist system there. And indeed today, when I compare my visits to China now, when I first came to China, I would receive visiting cards in which the officials would tell me their party position. Today, you never get a visiting card with a party position. They tell you their governmental position. And that means that the system is changing and becoming not more democratic yet, but more constitutional and more transparent. And as that develops, I believe the relationship between the two parts of China can progress.
We have to try. You know, we're optimistic.
Well, we will have a couple of minutes. Let me ask you this, which we haven't touched on. When in 1949, the movement into Taiwan by General Chiang, led by General Chiang, happened, the proportion then was about, what, 9-to-1 Taiwanese versus mainland Chinese. Now, is there a total unification of sentiment between those two, the ethnic Taiwanese and the people who settle there, on the matters we've touched on?
We have been in Taiwan. I mean, the mainlanders, so-called, have been in Taiwan, or the first generation of mainlanders have been in Taiwan for 45 years, and there's a considerable degree of integration. I mean, merging together, and the distinction is much less obvious than before. Of course, you tend to get these kind of candidates in elections which still advocate we are Taiwanese, or we, using this factional basis to solicit votes and political power. But on average, I think it is a much more harmonious.
Well, in the last national election won by President Lee, was there a division in sentiment between the natives and the non-natives?
No.
So they are for all intents and purposes, it's fungible, is it?
You can still calculate, analyze voting patterns and all that, but on a social basis, and perhaps even in elections, you don't see that much distinction, I would say.
So when you say that the people of Taiwan are in favor of going into the United Nations, you don't mean just one group.
No. There's a poll saying that 92% of the people wanted to have a better international status, including a return to the U.S.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jason Hu, the Director of the Government Information Office of Taiwan. Thank you, Dr. Henry Kissinger. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Next week on Firing Line, in the third of 4 programs on the Far East, Bill Buckley and his guests, Henry Kissinger, Jason Hu, Donald Gregg, and Richard Dicker, discuss what effect the grant of Most Favored Nation status to the People's Republic of China has had on human rights in that country. This program was a Warren Steibel production in association with South Carolina ETV. Funding for Firing Line was made possible by a major